The thing about the calories discussion is always that people think that calories is everything. So it's all about calories. A calorie is a calorie. You hear it all the time, and you've heard it for the last 50 years. And the thing is that that's simply not true because, again, people always say, well, you just have to get into a calorie deficit. And it's like, okay, so the calories in is what you eat, the calories out is what you burn, your metabolic rate, but you don't control your metabolic rate. So if you simply eat fewer calories, your body could simply burn fewer calories and body fat will be unchanged, right? So the question is, how does your body distribute those calories?
Welcome back to another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. This is Terri Lance, and I am joined today with Dr. Jason Fung. Jason, how are you doing today?
Very good, Terry. Thanks.
So I'm super excited to get to talk about this, and I realize I keep saying that because I get so excited about these episodes. We get to talk some more about the Hunger Code, your new book that's coming out. And I know people are anxiously awaiting its release, waiting to get their hands on it. And I feel very fortunate that I've gotten to start reading it, and very exciting. So we've talked in the past couple episodes a little bit about why the old model of weight loss doesn't work, even though we keep being told that it's what we should be doing. And that is eat fewer calories, burn more calories, and you'll have a deficit, which means weight loss. And you really highlighted again why that does not work. And we also talked a little bit about hunger being a more important thing to understand. So I wondered if we could do a little more deep dive into the hunger explanation that you're going over in this book and really helping people understand. Yeah, it is about storing too much fat, too much energy, I guess. But why we do that is what's important, not just knowing the equation, but knowing why that happens.
Before we start, I just wanted to mention for the Hunger Code, we're also doing a special masterclass for all the pre-orders. That's going to be a week-long masterclass that's going to be free with the purchase of the book so that we can actually really dig in with everybody onto this. And so, if you pre-order the book, then you'll be able to go to the website and be able to get access to this sort of week-long masterclass that we're going to offer special for the Hunger Code. It'll be very exciting and maybe, again, going into some of this deep stuff. The thing about the calories discussion is always that people think that calories is everything, right? So it's all about calories. A calorie is a calorie. Like you hear it all the time, and you've heard it for the last 50 years. And the thing is that that's simply not true because, again, people always say, well, you just have to get into a calorie deficit. And it's like, okay, so the calories in is what you eat, the calories out is what you burn, your metabolic rate, but you don't control your metabolic rate. So if you simply eat fewer calories, your body could simply burn fewer calories and body fat will be unchanged. So the question is, how does your body distribute those calories, right? The whole point is that if you take the energy balance equation, which is body fat, which is just simply stored calories, body fat equals calories in minus calories out. You could simply rewrite that and say calories in equals body fat plus calories out, right? That's just simple algebra. What it means is that for every calorie you eat, you can either store it or burn it. Well, that's logical enough. It's just like money in the bank, right? You can either store it or spend it. But which one do you do? So does your body store it or does your body burn it? Because that's very important. Because if your body stores it, then you're going to get fat. If your body is going to burn it, then you're going to have lots of energy around. And also, if there's lots of energy floating around for you to burn, well, you're not going to get hungry because you've got plenty of calories floating around for your body to burn. So it's not simply the number of calories, it's the hormones that are happening when you eat those foods. Because remember, food is more than just calories. Food contains calories, yes, but food also contains information. What that means is that when you eat certain foods, certain hormones go up and certain hormones go down. When you eat different foods, that hormonal response to those foods is completely different and it's measurable. We know this. So why deny that is true? Why pretend that these hormonal responses to the two different foods are different? Let's take an example. Say you eat 500 calories of brownies. Well, your glucose is going to spike up because there's a lot of refined carbohydrates, a lot of sugar, and your insulin is going to spike up. What's insulin going to do? Well, insulin's job, and it's a normal hormone, but its job is to say store these calories. That's what it's supposed to do. So you take these 500 calories, insulin spikes way up, and you store all 500 calories. Well, there's no energy for the rest of your body to use. So 10 minutes later, you're still hungry because your body's like, hey, there's no energy. Go get yourself a muffin. So it doesn't keep you full. On the other hand, if you eat 500 calories of steak, what happens? Well, insulin doesn't go up that much. It goes up a little bit. Glucose doesn't go up. So it doesn't store that energy. All that 500 calories, 800 calories is going to be left for your body and you're going to be full. At the same time, it's going to stimulate GLP-1, peptide YY, and cholecystokinin, which are satiety hormones, which tells you to stop. So even though both brownies and steak or eggs or salmon or whatever, or salad or broccoli, things that don't stimulate a lot of insulin, even though there's the same number of calories, the hormones are totally different. One is going to spike insulin, one is not. And all that simply means it doesn't break any laws of thermodynamics. And this is what those calories in, calories out people don't understand. They think that it's a thermodynamic inevitability. That's like, no, they don't understand thermodynamics at all. It doesn't break any laws of thermodynamics. It's the same number of calories. It's what your body is doing with those calories. So those two things, it just means that brownies are more fattening than broccoli. Well, isn't that simply logical? Why does everybody get, they're, all in a huff about this fact that different foods stimulate different hormones, which means they have a different fattening effect on the body? Because our body gains and loses fat according to the hormones that tell it to gain or lose fat. And so this is a purely logical thing. If you eat foods that stimulate a lot of insulin compared to foods that are the same calories but stimulate no insulin, that's going to be important for your body. Both the calories and the information. Where the calories gets confused is that if you eat a certain food, which stimulates a certain amount of hormones, and you eat double of that same food, you're going to get double the effect of that hormone. So that's going to have an effect, right? So there is obviously some effect of the calories, but it's not everything. And that's the whole point, is that some foods are more fattening than other foods. So find those foods that are more fattening. Why would you simply deny that fact that cookies are more fattening than salmon? Like, who gets fat eating broccoli? Who gets fat eating spinach? Very, very few people. That's the whole point. So that's why you have to really get into that deeper level of understanding, because this sort of calories in, calories out is a very, very superficial level of understanding that doesn't help anybody. It's really the same as saying that alcoholism is just alcohol in minus alcohol out. Well, that is true. So is the solution to say, just drink less alcohol? Hey, we should have zero alcoholism in the world. No, because you never understood the reason why alcohol in was greater than alcohol out. And it could be depression, it could be addiction, it could be all sorts of things. So if it's addiction, deal with the addiction. And you might use the 12 steps for Alcoholics Anonymous and so on, right? But what you don't do is simply believe that telling somebody to drink less alcohol is a legitimate answer to curing alcoholism, because it's the stupidest advice I've ever heard. And everybody knows this for alcohol. But for calories, it's like, why would we assume the same? Why is calories in greater than calories out? Because remember that if you simply eat fewer calories, your metabolic rate, which is the majority of your energy expenditure, is not controlled by you. You cannot decide to burn more calories. You cannot decide that, hey, you're going to shift the calories from your body fat into burning and decrease your hunger. That's the whole point. So if you think about any problem, you have to really ask the question why 3 times before you get to a reasonable answer. And this is a principle of logic. So, for example, if you say, why did the Titanic sink? You'd say, because it hit an iceberg. Okay, well, this is true, but it's not the right answer if you're trying to understand what happened. And you might think, hey, that's obviously the Titanic hit an iceberg. And yes, you're technically correct. But if you're to say, okay, so how are you going to prevent future disasters? Well, you'd say, don't hit icebergs. It's like, that's really stupid advice. Of course, you don't want to hit icebergs. And it's the same as the advice to just drink less alcohol. It's like alcoholism equals alcohol in minus alcohol out. So just drink less alcohol. That's the sort of superficial first level understanding. What you have to do is go into the second and third levels of understanding the root cause. So you say, why did the Titanic sink? Well, it hit an iceberg. But why did it hit that iceberg? Well, because the captain couldn't avoid it. Then you get to the third level, which is to say, why couldn't the captain avoid this iceberg? Because it was going too fast. That's the real answer. So the advice to prevent future disasters is slow down when you can't see properly. And that's good advice. Whereas don't hit icebergs is bad advice because it's superficial and it's not helpful. You get the same thing in alcoholism. You say, why do you get alcoholic? You go, alcohol in is greater than alcohol out. Just drink less alcohol. That's the don't hit icebergs advice. Then you have to say, why is alcohol in greater than alcohol out? You might say, well, they have an addiction, and then you deal with the addiction. In overweight, you say, why is people gaining weight? Well, because calories in is greater than calories out. That is always true. That's also not the end of the story. You have to say then, why is calories in greater than calories out? And the answer is because they're hungry. That's the reason you're eating. Remember, you eat because you're hungry, and you stop because you're full. That's like a core principle. Why would you simply deny that? We don't start eating because of calories and we don't stop eating because of calories. So this focus on calories is simplistic and first level, first order thinking. You get to the because you're hungry. And then you get to the even more interesting question is why are you hungry? And this is where you see that there's actually different levels of hunger, different types of hunger. So there's the physical hunger, which is called homeostatic hunger. This is where, your stomach's growling and you're feeling the hunger and so on. And that's controlled by your hormones, right? So there's lots of hormones that are involved here. So we know that insulin is involved, cortisol is involved, leptin, ghrelin, peptide YY, cholecystokinin, sympathetic tone, the baroreceptors, thyroid hormone. So that's like 10 hormones right there, all of which can be affected by different things. And the sex hormones are important too, right? So estrogen, testosterone. So the point is that if you simply focus on the calories, you don't get to that deeper level of understanding. And it can be the physical hunger, which is homeostatic, but then there's also a completely separate topic, which is hedonic hunger, which is eating for the pleasure of it. So remember that eating is something that most people enjoy. And it creates pleasure or reward in the brain, which is a release of dopamine or a release of reward pathways and so on. But that can tip over and you can wind up eating for emotional reasons. And this is called comfort foods, right? So if you have a comfort food, you eat it because it makes you feel better. Not because you have physical hunger, but you have emotional hunger, this hedonic hunger. So if you are eating because you're trying to make yourself feel better, that's a completely different hunger and a completely different reason that you're overeating. And that's where you have to focus. And that's where the ultra processed foods are very important. And we'll probably touch on that next episode. But also food addictions, which is another super important topic. And also other things such as mindfulness eating and stuff. There's lots of different ways to counteract that. But what you have to do is understand what it is. And hedonic hunger is just sort of this really important thing because if you have ultra processed foods, which really stimulate a lot of this rewarding pathway, you can wind up tipping it over into food addictions. And food addictions have to be treated like an addiction, which is different, right? So addictions, you can't simply say just eat less because that's horrible advice. If you have alcoholism, you don't just say, oh, alcohol in moderation. You'd have to be an idiot to think that, right? You'd say, no, you must abstain because you have an addiction, right? Or if you're addicted to cocaine, oh, cocaine in moderation is okay. No, it's not, right? So if you have food addiction, and there's food addiction scores and so on that are available now, then you have to acknowledge that. But it's not all foods. When you say you're addicted, it's only certain foods because people often say, well, you can't stop eating all foods. That's not the point. If you're addicted to alcohol, I don't tell you you have to stop drinking coffee. Absolutely not. Why would you? That's stupid. If you're addicted to And people say they're addicted to different things, but it's almost always ultra processed foods, right? I'm addicted to pizza. I'm addicted to chips. I'm addicted to bread. I'm addicted to chocolate. You know what it is, right? But how many people tell you I'm addicted to salmon? I'm addicted to eggplant. I'm addicted to bok choy. I like eggplant. I do. I'm not addicted to it. I like beef. I'm not addicted to it in any way. It's not like I'm going to overeat it and make myself unhealthy, right? But again, the point is that you do have to understand that.
I think, Jason, this is why what you've explained is so important. And I feel like beating this horse to death is really important in some ways because every food, like you said, it's not just the number of calories. The number of calories in bok choy, you can eat 500 calories of bok choy, but it's other information. It creates other responses. I always use this example with clients. I said, listen, if you were over at my house and we're having dinner and I prepared you a steak and asparagus, and you said, oh, Terri, I'm so full. And I said, but I've got another piece of steak. Please just eat this. They would say, I can't. I can't take another bite. But if I then said, all right, well, I have this cheesecake, they could eat a second piece of cheesecake. Why is that? It's not the difference in the calories, it's what other hormones are being activated for satiety reasons.
Exactly.
And so if we go back to it's just about the calories, am I satiated on 750 calories? It depends on what 750 calories I'm eating. What is the food? I feel like that's a big shift in understanding that people need to make. That's why, or at least part of the reason why it's not just the number of calories. It is what response does this food do? If I end my meal with chocolate cake, what do I want to eat for breakfast? I want cookies for breakfast.
Yeah.
But if I finish my meal with my steak and my salad and a nice coffee, I might not even need breakfast because my body, the satiety is still there.
Yeah. And it points to the fact that if you look at the steak, it's going to activate peptide YY, cholecystokinin, GLP-1. That's going to stop you from eating any more cold. If you try and eat that steak, you know you're going to stimulate more peptide YY, cholecystokinin, GLP-1, and you can't. And that's the lesson of Ozempic. So Ozempic is a GLP-1 agonist. And basically, what it does is it kills your hunger, homeostatic hunger, that is, right? And this is the whole thing. If you focus on calories, you're going to lose 100% because there are ways that you can physically restrict calories. You can wire somebody's jaw shut, which is actually popular in the 60s. And it didn't work. Why? Because people found a way around it. You can put a lap band, which is that band that you tie around the stomach. It's a surgical procedure. And that restricts you from eating. You can do the Roux-en-Y bariatric surgery. And the thing is that those surgeries peaked in 2010. Why? Even as people, the obesity epidemic got worse and worse, people weren't doing it. Why? Because it wasn't working. It was clear that after 5, 6, 7 years, people were regaining that weight. And you have to, again, understand why. It's because they restricted calories, but they didn't control the hunger. Now, when you control the hunger with Ozempic, now you see that as long as people stay on it, they do fine. Because think about it. Think about your hunger, think about your calories. If you simply restrict your calories, what usually happens is hunger goes up. Now you've got this mismatch, right? Your hunger is very high, your calories are very low. You're going to lose because you're always fighting yourself constantly. So even if you manage to keep it like that, you'll probably lose some weight, but your body will probably adjust if you don't eat the right foods. Because again, the insulin will put those calories into storage, even if you eat very few calories. What happens is that you'll just turn down your metabolic rate further. And every single study of weight loss has shown exactly this thing. You lose weight and your metabolic rate goes down. Instead of burning 2,500 calories a day, you're burning 2,000. And this effect persists. But now think about what happens when you focus on the hunger and you reduce the hunger. Well, your calories reduces as well, but now you're not fighting with yourself. And that's why it's so successful. It's not just Ozempic. You have drugs like fen-phen, so The other thing I talk about in the hunger code is sympathetic tone, not because it's affected by food so much, but it's just very instructive. When you increase sympathetic tone, so remember the autonomic nervous system has the parasympathetic, which is sort of a rest and relaxation mode, and a sympathetic tone, which is sort of fight or flight. So adrenaline, noradrenaline. When you increase the sympathetic tone, you actually decrease your appetite. So when you have drugs that increase sympathetic tone, and the classic is fenfluramine, which is that old fen-phen drug that was popular in the 80s, I think 70s and 80s. It got pulled off because of heart problems. But the thing is that it actually caused about a 17% drop in body weight on par with Ozempic. So it was just as strong. And what it did is it was a stimulant and it increased sympathetic tone and decreased your energy. And it was part of a class of drugs called anorexians. Again, you have to read some of the old literature to find out. Anorexians means it causes anorexia, which means causes loss of appetite. These drugs weren't working by increasing how much you were burning. They're working because it decreased your appetite. So fenfluramine, speed, so stimulants like amphetamines, which was called speed in the old days, then became crack. And you know, these crackheads, they're skinny as sticks. Why? They don't need to eat. They don't need to eat anything. I was reading this book recently about that, and they're describing it. They said it was used for weight loss, amphetamines or speed in the 60s, I think. And they'd say that they'd just take it and their appetite would go away. Then they wouldn't eat, and then therefore the thing. And that's the same as Ozempic, right? Obviously, Ozempic's a lot less side effects. Same thing for nicotine. But again, it tells you that it's about the hormones. When you get this mismatch between your hunger and your calories, then you're going to lose. The focus is really to go on to the hunger, focus on the hunger. And the example with the dessert is great too, because the whole point is the homeostatic hunger. But then there's also this whole hedonic hunger, which is all desserts. You don't eat because you are physically hungry. You eat them because you want to, because it makes you feel good. That is the only reason you take it. Now, if you start feeding that hedonic hunger, you can actually run into problems too. But you can get around, even if you are full from a physical standpoint, you can still overeat because of the hedonic hunger. And then the third type of hunger, which we go into, is actually, I think, is this sort of social environmental hunger, which is a conditioned hunger, which is actually probably, I think, the most important hunger we don't talk about. Just to get back, I was laughing a little bit when you said, "Oh, we beat this to death." It's like we only beat this to death here at the FM.
True.
No other program, no other books, nobody else talks about this stuff. We've always talked about these sort of social environmental things, the power of the groups, the power of the emotions, and all that. That's why you, as a psychology PhD, are here, right? As opposed to a dietitian, for example, where people focus on calories, right? Because that part is so important. We focus on those types of things and trying to get to the deeper level, the hunger, and we always try and get to the science of it rather than the superficial don't hit iceberg sort of advice that you get 99% of the time. We're all like, no, 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 no. That's just like Mickey Mouse grade school stuff. That's not for serious people, right? Unfortunately, most people are not talking about it. I don't think people talk about it enough. I think the fascinating thing to me is that if you look at different places, physical places like countries or even states, there's a huge, massive difference in obesity rates. And clearly, it's not about the people because you could take a Japanese person in Japan and their risk of obesity is quite low. Now, move that person to the United States and the risk goes way, way up, like 4 or 5 times the risk of that person in Japan. Why is that? It's the same person, it's the same willpower. The foods are available everywhere. They're both first world developed nations.
Same genetics.
Same genetics. What's the difference? The social environment. There are certain things that you can do in America that you can't do in Japan. A lot of the eating behaviors, for example. So when we talk about social influence is actually very important. That's why these influencers are so important. And that's why people throw a lot of money at them because it tells you what's acceptable and what's normal in a society. But the other thing is that a lot of the hunger that we get is sort of conditioned. which means that conditioning is part of this, where you pair one thing to another, then one thing stimulates another. So the classic example was Pavlov's dogs, where they would start to salivate when you rang a bell. And it's not because bells are naturally appetizing to dogs, but because they had paired the meal with the bell. So then the bell itself stimulated the hunger. Now you get the same sort of thing with people. So if you pair food with sitting in the car, and pair food with sitting in front of the TV, and pair food with seeing a movie, and pair food with every other thing, what's going to happen is when you sit in the car, you're going to stimulate that hunger. And that's the problem, right? You got to focus on the hunger. So those are the three important types of hunger. And honestly, I don't see anywhere else that has really ever talked about it and really focused in on this, which is why I thought The Hunger Code is actually a really important book to get people thinking about this problem. And it's like when you actually think about it, it's like this is pretty logical because we really should have been focusing in on this all along because it's the deeper level.
And it really then leads to what to do about it then.
Yeah.
Again, going back to the icebergs, we need to make sure pilots of these vessels can see. We need to make sure that we have speed control, not we need to just make sure they know not to hit icebergs. We need people to understand what to do about why I'm eating the way I'm eating, the frequency with which I'm eating. We as people need to understand that to help us manage what we're doing and then therefore what our body is storing and what our body is burning.
Yeah.
It's that missing link.
Yeah, it's the missing link. And I think this gets back to a concept like, if you think about homeostatic hunger, this whole concept, it's been around a while, which is this sort of body fat thermostat, which is also called the body set weight. And they've known this since the 70s because, when I started looking at the literature, you'd go back into stuff from the 70s and 80s, and they knew all about this. That is, if you take a person who is 200 pounds and has lost weight to 160 pounds, they struggle very hard to not regain that weight. Okay. And you compare that to a 160-pound person who's been like that their whole life. They actually have no struggles at all. It's very different that you can measure the number of calories it takes to sort of regain that weight and all this sort of stuff. They've done all kinds of tests, but the basic premise is very true. If you're overweight, you lose weight. Both people at 160 pounds are very different. One basically stays like that, and the other one struggles very, very hard to stay like that. And everybody knows it's true, right? Everybody's experienced this. But what's the difference? The difference is the way that the body gains and loses weight is that it has a sort of set weight, just like a thermostat, right? So if you have room temperature, 72 degrees, if it gets too hot, the thing turns on the air conditioning. If it gets too cold, it turns on the heat. Either way, you maintain that temperature. The body set weight is the same thing. It's a thermostat for your body fat. So if your body fat percentage wants to be very high and you want to be 200 pounds, if you drop yourself down to 160, it will activate mechanisms to bring you back up. If your body fat thermostat is set at 160, it will stay there. So if you gain weight, your body will actually try to make you lose that weight. So that's why that person can stay at that weight, whereas the formerly overweight person who's at that weight now really struggles. It's the setting of their thermostat. And again, what changes it? Well, it's the hormones. Everything is hormones. Really, if you look at the human body, almost everything is either nerves or hormones, right? That's the controlling mechanism. And so certain hormones push it up and certain hormones push it down. That's very simple because we have analogs of these hormones as drugs. So when you give somebody a lot of insulin, what happens? Well, their thermostat gets pushed up. They want to gain weight, so they gain weight. How do they do it? By calories in greater than calories out. Either it causes hunger, so you eat more, or it reduces your metabolic rate, so you're burning less. That's how it is, but it's not why you gain weight. The calories in, calories out is not why you gain weight. Why you gain weight was because you push your thermostat higher because of the insulin. And we're focused on this sort of calories in, calories out. That's the how of it. It's just like if you go into a room and it's really, really hot. You don't say, it's all heat in minus heat out. So let's go calculate the sources of heat in this room and the sources of cooling in this room. No, that's stupid. You just say, Why did somebody set the thermostat so high? Let's turn it down. So again, same thing. You have to say, well, what is pushing it up? What is pushing it down? So for example, insulin's going to push your thermostat up. Cortisol is going to push your thermostat up. GLP is going to push your thermostat down. Sympathetic tone is going to push your thermostat down. Again, why? We know that if we super stimulate GLP-1, your weight goes down. That means you're pushing your thermostat down. That's why you maintain that weight as long as you do that. When you give drugs like nicotine, you're stimulating sympathetic tone, you're pushing that thermostat down. So that's why smokers weigh less than non-smokers. Why? Because their appetite goes down. The mechanism of how it is controlled is through hunger and satiety. It's less calories in, yes, but why are those calories in less? Because you've pushed the thermostat down by the hormones. Just like your thermostat doesn't actually heat up the room, it acts on your heater or air conditioner to heat up or cool the room. The hormones don't directly stimulate. There's no calories in insulin, but insulin causes weight gain because it acts on hunger, satiety, and eating behavior. So those things push it up, those things push it down. We can do it experimentally. I could make anybody, I could make you fat. I give you enough insulin. I prescribe it for you, big doses, you'll gain weight. I'll gain weight. Everybody gains weight. Why? Because we know that that's the hormone that pushes your thermostat up. And whether it's because you will eat more or you'll eat the same and you're burn less, it doesn't matter. You're still going to gain that weight because the insulin told you to gain that weight. But once you understand that those are the things that adjust your thermostat, then you can say, okay, let's focus in on, say, cortisol. Sleep, for example. We know that sleep deprivation makes people gain weight. Well, there's no calories in sleep. Sleep deprivation doesn't increase your calories. But what does it do? It increases your stress, increases your cortisol level, pushes your thermostat up, which makes you hungry because your body is trying to gain that weight because your thermostat's up. But your body's like, hey, you either eat more or I'm going to burn less. And then people who just focus on the calories, they eat the same. What happens is that their bodies burn less. They feel cold, they feel tired, they feel like crap. But worse, they're still gaining that weight because the cortisol told them to gain that weight. So you see all these things like stress. How does it manifest? Well, the cortisol is a stress hormone. It's going to increase your thermostat. And then what do you get? Stress eating for some people.
Yeah, it activates behaviors that we use to compensate for that.
Exactly.
And that goes into that food makes us feel better. If I'm really tired, food makes me feel better. But
Yeah.
I don't eat spinach to feel better.
Yeah.
I eat brownies or potato chips to feel better.
Yeah, and that's a really important topic that has gained a lot of attention in the last little bit, which is ultra-processed foods and food addiction. Both of them are actually in the last, I'd say, 10 years, really taken off in terms of research and our understanding of why they're so bad. And obviously, in the United States, the new dietary guidelines really the number one thing it says in the first two sentences is eat real food. And this is this idea that the ultra processing of foods actually causes problems. It's not the calories, it's not the carbs, it's not the macronutrients, it's the processing. And why? Because when you process it differently, it affects the hormones. So you can take the same food, the exact same food, and there's measurable differences again. So you could take an apple slices versus applesauce. So you take the apple, you bake it, and then you puree it. You can compare that to whole apple slices. So remember that because you haven't added or subtracted anything, the calories and the carbohydrate content and sugar content and everything on that nutrition label is identical between those two foods. There's a huge difference in the hormonal response of those foods. There's a huge difference in how quickly our stomach releases the foods. This is called the gastric transit time. And there's a huge difference in how quickly our glucose spikes in response to those two foods. Applesauce, for example, because it's baked and pureed, is sort of pre-digested. It's super easy for the stomach to pass it through to the intestines and super easy for the intestines to absorb it into the bloodstream. And because the glucose is going to spike much higher, it's going to affect the hormones, which then affects how much weight you gain. So everybody thinks it's about calories or even carbs, but it's not. There's a process of digestion. And in the hunger code, I list like 10 different things that affect digestion, like food order and food timing and meal timing and vinegar and organic acids and all these other things that affect digestion. Then there's absorption or how quickly your body absorbs these. And this depends on gastric transit time, amongst other things. You take the foods, which contain calories and carbs. There's the process of digestion, the process of absorption, which affects these different hormones. And I list like 10 or 12 hormone systems that are important, which then affects your weight. Even if you're thinking about homeostatic hunger, it's actually a far more complex than from calories to weight or carbs to weight. No, it's from the food to the digestion to the absorption to the hormones to the weight. And the more you understand it, the more you see where things can fall off the rails. Processing is one of these things that really bypasses a lot of these things so that you get super quick absorption. And that's really important, not just for homeostatic hunger, but also for hedonic hunger. So when you get those dopamine spikes, you want the big spikes. And the only way you can get a big spike is to have very quick absorption. And that's the same thing if you look at nicotine. You smoke cigarettes because it goes from the smoke into your lungs, into your blood vessels very quick. If you eat nicotine, it's slow because you got to digest it. So that's why you use nicotine chewing gum instead of smoking when you want to try to reduce the effect. Same nicotine. You might eat the same nicotine, but it's absorbed much slower and therefore much, much less addictive. Same thing with heroin. You inject it into your vein. You don't eat it. Cocaine, you sniff it. It goes into the blood vessels in your nose directly. You don't eat cocaine. It's not nearly as effective. Marijuana, same thing. So all of these drugs. So for hedonic hunger, you want that massive spike in glucose. That's what's going to make you feel better. And that's also what tips you into food addictions and causes a lot of problems, right? But from a purely hedonic part of the equation, you want that very quick absorption. So, it's such an interesting and complex experience. Like human physiology is very, very complex. There's all these different factors that go into even homeostatic hunger has like a million different things going on there. And everybody wants to dumb it down into calories. It's like, okay, you're just missing the whole picture here. And the worst part is they don't realize they're missing the picture. They're aggressively like, oh, it must be this. It must be this. It's like, gosh, you just don't understand.
And one of the things you highlight in the book, Jason, which I think is so important, is this is where people feel like they're failing. They're blamed. It's just math. If you could do a better math equation and eat fewer calories and burn more calories, you wouldn't have this problem. You must be lying. You must not be following the diet I gave you.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you that you can't do this? And by really digging into this deeper level, no wonder we struggle. It's a complex framework.
It's crazy because, yeah, exactly what you're saying. Because the doctors and the dietitians and the all the scientific authorities and the university are saying it's all just math. It's all just calories in, calories out. Don't hit icebergs, right? Because of that, they say when you fail, it's not our advice that's bad. You are bad as a person. So now you've gone from a disease, obesity, which is extraordinarily complex. A lot of different things can go wrong, including things like hedonic hunger and emotional eating and stuff, right? You've gone from a complex physiologic problem that we are trying to understand to it's just math, therefore it's your fault. And that's where the fat shaming and all that stuff comes in, the guilt and all that stuff. And the problem is that women, men, they've believed it. They've bought it, hook, line, and sinker. It's completely wrong. All these calories in, calories out people that it's all about calories, it's all about calories. No, different calories have different effects on hormones, which means that some foods are more fattening than other foods. Therefore, figure out which foods it is that are more fattening. And that's just the homeostatic side of things. We haven't even touched the hedonic hunger or the conditioned hunger, which we'll go into deeper in the next episode. But it's such an extraordinarily important topic. And that's why I'm really excited for the hunger code. Because again, I just haven't seen any book talk about stuff like this. I mean, we talk about it obviously at TFM, right?
Sure.
But other people aren't getting that information, which is extraordinarily important. And that's why we're doing this masterclass, which hopefully people will pre-order the book, get the book, and then we can follow along in the masterclass, really try and troubleshoot and stuff. I'm actually really excited for this because it's a great deal too. It's like a $30 book and the masterclass is like $4.99 normally, right? So it's like it's a great deal, but we just want to get the information out there, help people get this in front of them. We've got these products. We're going to do a fast along with that, and then we're going to do some fasting products and stuff. And it'll be exciting actually. And the whole fasting piece of things we haven't even talked about either. So we'll go next time because that actually has super important aspect for both conditioned and hedonic hunger. Because hedonic hunger, which tips into food addictions, has to be treated with abstinence, right? You can't just say, take a little bit, it's okay. It's not okay. When you tip into the food addictions, you really have to go into abstinence. Same thing, every addiction. It's just the way it is. It's just the nature of the beast. Because we haven't recognized food addiction, we get this everything in moderation. No, you can't do that.
And we'll definitely spend some time on this. I just had a conversation with a client the other day, trying to take it out of the shame of food addiction, that there are foods that have been created to be addictive. And your body works in a way that it's addictive. It's not a weakness in you if you develop food addiction. So I can't wait to dive into that with you, Jason.
Oh, yeah. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you so much for this conversation today. I look forward to our next episode together. And until then, everyone, take good care.
Thanks so much.